Well, friends, welcome to another Kids Mental Health webinar here from the Dakota Medical Foundation studio. And today's topic is about a whole world out there, a whole dark world that most of us are not aware of. And it's a world that most of us will be shocked by some of the information we're going to hear today. But by taking this time to listen to this conversation and the actions associated with it, you can save potentially hundreds, if not just one, that's worth it from people experiencing, especially children, experiencing a lifelong trauma experience. And so today's topic is going to contain some sensitive material. So, a warning to our viewers, because today's topic is all about preventing child sexual abuse. And it's an honor to welcome Anna Frissell. She's been the executive director of Red River Children's Advocacy Center since 2004. And Anna has played a pivotal role in the development of our curriculum in preventing child sexual abuse, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Anna, welcome to the studio today.
Thanks, Scott. It's great to be here.
Well, Anna, could you start? Most of us, again, are not aware of the scope or the severity of child sexual abuse. Could you tell us how big and how prevalent is this problem?
Yeah, there's a lot of studies, a lot of research done on this, and it's really difficult to determine what the scope of the problem is in as much as so many people that are the victims of abuse don't ever tell anyone, or may tell someone as they age. Perhaps they say that boys, if they're abused, often wait up to 21 years as an average for a disclosure. And girls, it may happen much later in life. So it's difficult to come up with a number, but research tells us that at least 1 out of 10 kids is the victim of child sexual abuse in this country. And that's pretty startling.
So this is, that's a scary number. 1 in 10. Is there a general profile? I mean, does this happen to a certain type of person? Is this everyone? What does this look like?
There is no typical victim of child sexual abuse. It can happen to anyone. It can happen in any neighborhood. It can happen to at any socioeconomic level. You could live in a mansion or you can live in a car and you can be the victim of child sexual abuse. There is commonality that makes kids perhaps that characteristics that might set up situations that make it a little bit more likely to happen. And when you walk through our prevention campaign, you get an opportunity to learn a little bit about that. But so certainly there are things that signs that we can watch for, but no, you can't guess which child might be the victim based on any kind of economics or race or any of those kinds of things.
And again, taking us down this path of just, starting with an education of this problem, what is the impact? What does this look like? And maybe let's start first with the victims. What does this look like through your eyes as the executive director of the Red River Children's Advocacy Center? Can you just walk us through what kind of devastating effects that, a victim is going to experience?
We have a lot of research on that as well, because it is the trauma. Child sexual abuse is the incidence of it are traumatic events, and they leave marks. Trauma leaves marks on humans, and children that are the victims of child sexual abuse may in fact be develop post-traumatic stress disorder and all the kinds of things you've heard about that trauma happens to children that are the victims of child sexual abuse. So you take that, there's many studies. One of the famous studies is ACEs, it's called. It's the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. And it's a study where they've conducted it for decades now, and where they take a look at 10 adverse experiences that a child can have that will have asking the questions of adults about these experiences, and then looking at that information and determining how they can project these experiences impact you as an adult. So, for instance, some of those kinds of experiences are certainly child sexual abuse, child physical abuse, neglect, exploitation, the things that are in our mission at the Red River Children's Advocacy Center, but also the incarceration of a parent, and different things like that are going to have an impact on you. And then they took a look at what that does to you for the trajectory of your life, what kind of impact that trauma has without intervention, without some kind of mental health intervention. And they found higher rates of obesity, higher rates of suicide, addiction, problems with relationships, inability to complete certain things in your life. There's all the kinds of things you can imagine that could happen. All are out there, and without some kind of intervention, are possibilities for kids that have been child sexually abused. They don't all happen to any child. Some don't happen at all, but the great majority of children that are the victims of child sexual abuse without intervention have very negative impacts.
Well, and you've listed this, it's difficult to come up for a number. It's 1 in 10. We also have long periods of time where people don't report. And we can talk about that. I'm sure there's lots of reasons for that. But what surprises people when you share about this locally?
I think the biggest surprise is that it happens at all. I think most people they think it happens somewhere else, or they think if it happens to someone else, and it happens by strangers are the abusers, someone outside that family circle, certainly not within the family circle, certainly not to kids in my neighborhood or my family. And I think that's shocking to people, because having those myths, hanging on to those myths about it, allow them to protect themselves from actually facing that the issues are very real and happen unfortunately everywhere.
Is it typical that it is somebody that the family or where the victim is from, that's within their circle?
Yeah, it is. It's amazing, but it is very typical. I often say that I've been at the Children's Advocacy Center. I served on the board for a couple of years and then became the director. And in all the years that I've been there, I think that it's accurate to say that I've only seen about 10 cases that were strangers, where there was a true stranger involved. The vast majority of the cases that we see are someone that the child loves, someone who's built a relationship with the child where the child feels trust and respect and honors their relationship with the person. It may be a neighbor. It may be a boyfriend or a girlfriend of the mother or father. It might be a grandparent. It could be a biological mother or father. It can be a relationship outside the home. I mentioned neighbor, but it could also be some kind of other opportunity that the abuser gets to make a relationship with the child, like a club or an organization or an extracurricular activity where that abuser is involved and builds a relationship with the child. But it is someone that the child knows and someone the child trusts.
Well, and in terms too of what kind of impact this has on our community, you've shared so eloquently about what happens to a victim. But what are some of the things that you've seen as you've ran the center? If this problem continues without being addressed, which we're going to talk about today, what are the impacts? And, what does this mean to our community? What does this mean to our social networks? And, just what type of devastation is this causing?
As you can imagine, and I want to say that I think most people have probably suffered some kind of trauma in their life that they put into the fabric of their lives, and they They hopefully get intervention, hopefully some kind of mental health help or a good support system at home, or something that allows them to, you've lost someone you love. You maybe are in an automobile accident. There's all sorts of traumas that occur. And so, when you think about that and you think about the impact of it to a child, and then you think about mixing into that trauma, that intimate relationship, that, and I want to say that when we talk about a trusted relationship, abusers build that relationship with the child. If you take the prevention education, you get an opportunity to learn about grooming, and you begin to see how an abuser seeks a situation that they are going to be able to use to build a relationship that's going to allow them access to the child. This is not about bad parenting. Can it be bad parenting? Yes. And an abuser can be a parent, but it's about someone that is grooming and working to build that relationship with the idea in the end of the child's sexual abuse. So when you think about that and put that into place, that's what the child has gone through. That all of that is mixed together for this child. And then we expect them courageously to disclose and to begin a path, again, without intervention. I've got glorious things to say about what mental health interventions can do for these kids. But without that, as Scott is pointing out, the impacts might be aggressive behavior on the child's part, or maybe isolation, maybe a child that doesn't want anything to do with anyone. Maybe the abuser sets up a grooming situation where the child, in fact, is uncomfortable with building other relationships because the abuser is trying to isolate them from other people. The abuser doesn't want them to talk. So the best way to make that happen is to make them feel uncomfortable in other relationships. About 2/3 of the kids that we see are under the age of 13. When you think about that, that's who is, if you were going to think of a child that would be most vulnerable, it's probably a younger child who has a more difficult time, who doesn't have as large of a scope of relationships. So that's who abusers often target. And our statistics show that. So when they get out in the community, what does our community see? It sees children that are acting out. It sees kids that maybe are running away. I mentioned the ACEs. It sees a higher suicide rate. There's plenty of research that tells us that over the lifetime of a young girl victim of child sexual abuse, there's going to be about $280,000 to $290,000 worth of expenses that really come right from that healthcare issues and other issues throughout their lifetime. So it's expensive. There's an economic burden to child sexual abuse. There is a resource burden. It's difficult to build resources to meet the needs of these kids, whether it's juvenile detention centers, whether it's more county social service individuals, whether law enforcement is called upon more because they're acting out. So Scott, you hit the nail on the head. The impact to the community is devastating, to every community.
Well, I think that showcases how connected we really are and our responsibility to care for one another. Because the image you just, have painted for us so eloquently is this is prevalent. Most of us, are not aware that it's happening. It's happening to people that may be close to us. It's not uncommon for a perpetrator to be within the family circle, somebody you trust. And that when somebody experiences abuse, it leads to all sorts of greater challenges. In fact, that makes me think that there's one question is that we're looking at incarceration rates and some of these other behaviors. That one question might be is what type of trauma have they experienced? Mm-hmm. And so, Anna, knowing that this is prevalent, it could be people close to us, and we know that it's devastating for the victims and affects us as a broader community. What are some of the things we can do that is in the prevention program that we can start to look for? What are some of the key things we should know as parents and as coaches, as caring adults, that we should be on the lookout for?
Well, I'm going to steer everyone to that Dakota Medical Foundation Child Sexual Abuse Prevention website. The tools are there. And there's a video, about a 38-minute video that walks you through the tools with handouts that are keyed off the video, so you have an opportunity to match them up and really slow down, pause, think how you can personally implement it. Watch it with friends, a group of people, have the conversations. You know, we're not sitting here saying that every day you have to spend every minute worrying about your child and child sexual abuse. What we are offering you is, or what that program offers you, is an opportunity to take the steps so you don't have to worry all the time. So you've got plans in place, understandings with your kids, safe places where kids can go when they feel uncomfortable. When grooming starts, if a grooming relationship is being attempted by a potential abuser, then you're in a position to recognize some of those signs, to take steps to try to make sure that the places where your child is most vulnerable, perhaps, that you have you and the other adults in that place have an understanding of how you protect kids. Or what you expect for your children. Setting up boundaries, you know, and I also want to say that you can do everything in the world. Everything. You can be the best parent in the world, and an abuser can still get at your kids. The fact that your child is a sexual abuse victim doesn't necessarily make you a bad parent. You may be a bad parent. You know, there are bad parents out there, but it doesn't make you a bad parent. But with these tools, you can be a better parent. And the odds are going to be a lot less of it happening. And what the really beauty of the program is that if we all, every caregiver, everyone that cares about children, you don't have to have your own kids to want to watch this program. You may be a neighbor, a grandparent. You might have kids that you care about in some other aspect of your life. And having these tools are going to help you and help support the family around that child. So it's important for everybody. And here's the thing, if we can spread this prevention program, if we can all get this information to every corner of our community, we can all be a bit more vigilant about our kids. And we send a message out to abusers that they're not welcome here, that we take steps to stop this from happening, and that they better look out, because in our community, they'll probably be caught. Our kids know to go to someone for help. Our kids know where to go, and our kids aren't going to be afraid to do that, because we're going to help give them the tools to understand, to stop it early. What does grooming mean? Grooming means that it begins and it builds. We want to stop it when it begins.
But I do want everybody to know that whatever streaming service you're using to view this or to watch this, that there'll be a link accompanying it, and that'll take you right to the curriculum. And I can tell you, as a parent that watched it, it completely changed a lot of the conversations that my wife and I would have never have had previously. And they're, it's not that we're accusatory of anybody or anything, but we are much more vigilant about relationships and boundaries around our children, knowing what this looks like, because the cases usually seem to surprise people who it is. And so we are a lot more vigilant. And, hearing you present that, if we watch this and again, anybody with that's a caring adult. I mean, even if you have young kids that are babysitting, and because this is something that we should all watch, because we want to be a community that stands up and says no. And we want to send that signal as strong and as bright as we possibly can. But Anna, as people are watching this and they're starting to make these changes, can you give us just a few things that you've seen that have been helpful for families and for loved ones, that's mentioned in the curriculum, but for those watching it now, that can be helpful for them to be vigilant and protective of the children in their care?
Well, I think that I'd start with saying something Scott just said. As a parent, he watched it and it opened his eyes and it changed his conversations. So I think that's a really important starting place. I mentioned earlier that one of the things I run into a lot is that people just don't believe this happens. And I think the prevention video helps you understand how, in fact, it could happen, and where your place is in that. So that's a sort of a big, high level vision kind of thing that I think you walk away from that prevention program with. But some really important specifics. go to I'm going to the end of the video for this one, but a really important one is for you to have a comfort level with where to report if you do feel uncomfortable. And the video walks you through that, to go to your local social service agencies and call the intake line and report something. They'll help you figure out whether in fact it is a report that should move forward, and they'll do the investigation. Their responsibility is to keep our kids safe in our communities, and they do a good job of that. So that's a really important piece of it, because a lot of people say, well, what do I do if I do see it? I mean, and I can't tell you how many times over the years people have called me and said, yeah, I feel really uncomfortable about this, but I don't really want to say anything. I don't know what to do. What should I do? And my response is, for many individuals, you're a mandated reporter and you have to report. There's many professions listed in the North Dakota and Minnesota laws that require reporting on their part. And for other individuals, it's just the right thing to do. And you can do it anonymously typically, and make the report, and the information gets in the hands of people that can determine the validity of it. So that's important. The other things, though, in there that are really buried in there are just ideas about have conversations with your kids, how you have those conversations, tools to have those conversations with, ways to help kids identify who's safe in my life. If I'm bothered by something, who do I go to? And who do I have that conversation with? I think that's really valuable. I think beginning that process of having those conversations really helps kids think about those kinds of issues. And it's not only about child sexual abuse. These are principles. The principles in the prevention campaign will be useful for your child and you in many times, in many places in your life. So I think there's a lot of value in those kinds of exercises.
Well, and I think this interview and the curriculum itself, to prevent child sexual abuse, is such important and incredible work, Anna. We've had a lot of ground gained in reducing stigma around addiction and around mental health, and child sexual abuse is a mental health issue as well. And could you speak to, we've talked about caregivers and parents and anybody seeing things reporting, but something you do every day, which is also speak to the victims, which you say oftentimes don't report. For anybody that's listening to this or viewing us, what would you like to know, want them to know about reporting and what they should do?
I think that it is. I understand the difficulty in disclosing, certainly, but I also think that it's so important that those disclosures come forward so that we can stop the abuse from happening and provide the kind of intervention for kids that have been abused that's going to help them to a healthy adulthood. Because the amazing thing is they will be able to have a healthy adulthood with appropriate interventions. Child sexual abuse isn't a mental illness, but we have therapies and interventions that allow kids to come back or be able to deal with the trauma. So I guess I'm saying that there are a lot of people that don't disclose for a lot of reasons, and many of those reasons are buried in that grooming process, threats made by the abuser, fears. Children have a remarkable ability to feel unconditional love, even for people that hurt them. And so sometimes it's protection of their father or their mother. There are many female abusers, by the way. That's another myth. People don't want to think that women do this. Women do this. People don't want to think that men do it either. There are certainly most of the kids that we see that are abused are female. About 2/3 of the kids that come to the center are female, and about 1/3 are male. We think that that's an issue of under disclosure. We think more males are victims than we see. We also think there's more females that are victims than we see. But so I guess what I'm saying is that I always feel that balance of wanting this to be out in the public, but wanting the message to be that it's if it happens, and there are lots of things you can do to help put this in its proper place in the story of your life. And I want the community to embrace it like they're beginning to embrace addiction, like you said, with regard to the kinds of things you can do to be in recovery and how the community can support that. And to bring it out of the shadows and into the light. Children deserve that, and families deserve that. So,
Well, and Anna, can you also just share, about the ongoing program at your center, and a little bit just to continue sort of this, as it's a heavy topic, which we want to acknowledge for all of our listeners today. But sort of build us out the pathway of hope that's happening through your center and in this partnership on the
I
prevention
love
program.
this. Now we're where I mean, the center, the Red River Children's Advocacy Center, is not the only nonprofit doing this work. There are many nonprofits doing important work with regard to mental health therapies and working with victims. But at our center, we provide unique services in the community. In that we receive referrals from law enforcement and social services that that bring kids and families into our array of services. We are an intervention. We are a place where the disclosure can happen by the child in a very safe and comfortable environment, in a way that preserves that disclosure. We make a DVD of it. We have a team of professionals watching it, who includes law enforcement, social services, mental health, medical professionals, prosecutors, and advocates who are watching that disclosure occur, while a forensic interview, really extraordinarily highly trained individuals at our center do the forensic interview work, and they assist the child in this disclosure process. So in order for children to come to us, imagine this: there has to have been some place where this child's disclosure comes forward, and maybe the most minimal facts, maybe a teacher, maybe a best friend of a child in school. Maybe the child says something that the best friend thinks doesn't sound right, and she tells her teacher or tells her mom, and then it has to get into the hands of social services or law enforcement. The report does. And if it's a teacher, a mandated reporter, it's likely to get there maybe quicker or easier route than it would through a neighbor or just a friend, right? Who's not so sure, except if they watch the prevention education, they know how to do it. But if they haven't seen it yet, it's a little bit more difficult to figure out how to get that report in. So now you've got this child who's sort of begun the process of trying to get someone to pay attention to this, wherever that is, brave enough to just eke it out a little bit to see what kind of response she gets from people, or he gets. Are they horrified? Should I not say anything? Is it, how, and you're working it through the system. To get to us, it has to have gone to law enforcement and social services. So when I talk about how this is 1 out of 10 kids, how many of these stories get lost in that process? How many kids try to bring it out, but just never quite get it to the right place? And so once it gets to us, we do the forensic interview. We help the child through this process. We preserve the interview on a DVD that is given to law enforcement or social services. Our job isn't the investigation. Our job is the child. But the team has jobs. The medical people are listening to that interview, thinking about what kind of medical interventions and forensic evidence collection needs to happen. The mental health professionals listening to or thinking about this case, this child, with regard to what are the mental health therapies? What in the assessment process do we have to do to develop the kind of information we need to know what trauma-informed therapies are going to work for this child? The law enforcement officers thinking, boy, what do I have to do? What kind of evidence do I have to secure in order to put together the information that I bring to the prosecuting and attorney to determine if, in fact, they're going to go forward with this? Do I need to get a subpoena for the computer? The child mentioned a computer. What do I need? There's amazing stories about this. There's a story about a multidisciplinary team that was listening to a forensic interview, and the child in the interview was talking, and about how when they were sexually abused, during the sexual abuse, an eagle came down from above and was trying to save them. And they went off on this whole story. This was a young child. I don't know the age, but a young child. And everybody in the team room back in that watching the interview was thinking, oh, this is fantasy. How are we going to prove? I mean, this is, when it's difficult to tell what if this child is imagining or if it's real. Law enforcement executed a warrant on that house and found that the child had said this had happened in the bed, and there was a huge quilt with an eagle on the bed. And here the child had given them just the information that ultimately had a big impact on convicting that abuser. And so law enforcement's listening for that kind of information, and they're trained to do that, and they do a good job. And social services is thinking about the safety of this child. This multidisciplinary team is focusing on this child and this family. The advocate is visiting with the parents and giving them information about referrals and things that might help their family, because this is a very devastating situation that the family's in, and we recognize that. Offender aside, we've got the abuser is not allowed in our center. Only non-offending caregivers can come into our center. So we're dealing now with people that are trying to help figure out the path forward. We have a free mental health clinic, and at that clinic, our therapists do an assessment, family and child assessment, figure out the kinds of therapies that are going to be really the most helpful. And we have the care clinic, the Sanford Care Clinic, that's co-located with us. Remarkable medical professionals that of course treat first the medical needs of the child, but also are considering the forensic needs to prove to support this child's account of what occurred. How do you support that within the medical forensic examination? So all of these professionals at the center are focused on figuring out the next steps, and it's a pretty remarkable process. I feel very grateful to be a part of it.
Well, and I think anybody that's watching this or listening to this, if you have experienced abuse or you're seeing abuse, Anna just laid out that there is intervention, there is protection available through the Red River Children's Advocacy Center.
And I want to say, there are mental health interventions available now that totally change the landscape. When I started at the center, we didn't have we've grown and we've learned. And today there are therapies that years ago, I think I mentioned this to Scott. Kids used to come in and they went back out the door. And they were getting referrals out to great mental health professionals that were working with these kids. But you just always felt like, are they getting what they really need? And what can we do more? Well, opening the mental health clinic and the prevention campaign, those are the pieces that we as a community can do more. I mean, that's where we get the chance to fund mental health professionals around our community. We aren't the only ones. There are plenty of mental health professionals in this community that are working very hard to be able to deliver trauma-informed therapies, and that we feel quite confident when we refer our kids to them that they are getting great therapy. So that's available out there. But, it can be hard to find, and we hope that we can help. We hope places like the Red River Children's Advocacy Center and Rape and Abuse Crisis Center and other nonprofits can help figure out how to connect those up if we can't, if we don't have the therapy. People have private providers, and we respect that. So it is a whole different world right now when you can feel really like kids are getting what they need to get healthy. And it makes, as I said, I'm really grateful to do this work, and I'm grateful for a community that supports this work. I'm extraordinarily grateful for Dakota Medical Foundation for putting together that prevention campaign. I mean, these are all the pieces that are going to make it work.
Yeah, and one thing, for anybody that does take that step of bravery, if they have experienced abuse, that they just have to tell their story once. That's part of what the center does for health and protection. But what we want to do, and really a central point of this discussion today, is we want to make sure this never happens in the first place. And so, Anna, can you just walk us through one more time the power of this prevention program and what it looks like and what people will experience?
This year so far at the center, we've seen 683 kids. Now, I can't tell you how many of those kids wouldn't be at the center if there'd been a prevention program in their lives earlier. But what I can tell you is that with that prevention program, you are going to have the opportunity to learn and incorporate into your relationships with your children and other children the tools that are going to allow you to be best placed to stop this from happening. And I believe that we can stop child sexual abuse. I think that with a groundswell, we can. I'm not totally naive. I recognize that there may be 2% of the abusers that no matter what we can do, we can't stop them. The deviant, there are people that perhaps we can't stop, and I don't know what we do with them. I'm glad that's not my job. But 98% of the child sexual abuse, I think with the prevention program and really incorporating the tools into the lives of the people that are care about kids, we can stop it. So take a look at it. Incorporate the pieces of it that really work quickly for you. Like I said, do it with a group, and there's nothing in there that can't be used easily in your family's situation or your relationships.
Well, I'd like our audience to know that this is a formal invitation to join a movement. You can prevent child sexual abuse, and we can be a region that sets the standard for what that looks like for us to stand up and say no. And it is a relatively low bar to get started, which is to watch this prevention curriculum. The link is going to be included with this video or wherever you're streaming this. And we ask that you share this with 5 people. And in fact, I challenge you to do more. If you work at a business, ask your business to share it on your email list, the full email list. Share it with college students, share it with your faith community, share it with your social clubs. The best thing that we could do is activate any existing network to take not a long period of time to get educated on how they can help to prevent child sexual abuse from happening. Anna, any closing thoughts you'd like to share with our audience today?
No, I appreciate that you're still with us. This is a hard conversation to have. And I think that I would hope that once you do the prevention video, you, as Scott said, share it widely. Let us know if you've got suggestions, things that you think we can do with that. The deal is get it out to every corner of our community. I think I've said it all when I say I think we can stop child sexual abuse, but we can't. No one organization can do it alone. It takes everybody.
Well, we've learned that child sexual abuse is prevalent. In fact, the numbers, which are difficult to calculate, estimate at 1 in 10. We've learned that this is usually somebody you trust. It's somebody within the circle. Most of us are surprised that this is even happening, let alone that it's happening so prevalently. We've learned that there is hope when somebody experiences abuse. And we know that if we don't intervene with help, that it's going to lead to devastating consequences for the victim and for the community at large. And that we can do something about this. We can actually stop this from ever occurring. And that's our invitation to you, is to please participate in the Child Sexual Abuse Prevention Program. The links are with this video. We want to thank you for joining us today. Special thanks to you, Anna, for coming and sharing your insight, your wisdom, and your experience. And we appreciate all of you that are viewing today.
Thank you.